Okay, thank you for the lovely introduction. It's great to be here in London today, even better to be presenting at this brilliant event as well. So thank you for the invitation, Hudl. My main aim today really is to give you all a bit of a kind of snapshot, a bit of an insight and a bit of an overview into contextualized match demands. And I suppose what I kind of mean by contextualized match demands is adding a narrative and a story around the physical numbers to kind of aid your interpretation around them. And for many decades in elite football, we've been, in some ways, viewing the physical data through a very reductionist lens, where we simply look at the physical, with very little consideration for things like the tactical, the technical, and what I'll talk a lot about today, the contextual factors that we know are important at linking with the physical data. So I always believe in that we look at data in integration rather than isolation to get great insights. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today in my presentation, is how context is not just king, it's probably the king of kings when we're trying to interpret the demands of the game. And I've seen a number of presentations today on this stage in particular, which have highlighted the importance of the technical and tactical area of the game. And what I wanted to do in my presentation today is just fly the flag a little bit for the physical area. Because it is really important in the modern game, and the reason why it's really important is because it's evolving so rapidly. Okay? And that's where I want to start in my presentation, really. By reviewing a kind of 20-year timeline on the bottom here. We've got intense running in meters along the side. And I'm going to review 6 different studies I've published on different competitions around the world. And we're going to review nearly 100,000 player observations, so a really big sample size. And my kind of journey at looking at the evolution of the game started with our top tier here, the English Premier League, where in just 7 seasons we saw an upsurge in intensity of nearly 30% from that 06-07 to the 12-13 season. Really kind of indicating that there's been some fairly significant changes physically in the most popular league in the world. At the same time we were publishing this research, we were also seeing a real rise in the women's game on many different fronts. And I was asked by FIFA to do the official physical analysis alongside Dawn Scott, who's presenting at this conference actually, where we looked at the Canada 2015 World Cup against the France 2019 World Cup. And what did we find? Well, we found even more change, a 22% increase, not over 7 seasons as we can see with the Premier League data set, but over just a 4-year World Cup cycle. An astonishing increase, in fact, based on the other data sets we've seen. He also did the same for FIFA as well in relation to Russia 2018 against Qatar 2022. We saw an increase again, albeit a lesser margin and magnitude. And then some more recent data sets that we're currently working on show similar types of trends over kind of more recent seasons. And you can kind of see the Belgian Pro League there, over 7 seasons, and the French League One as well, which show around about 12 to 16% increases in intensity across them kind of seasons we're looking at there. And because I'm a scientist first and foremost, I also like to add a bit of balance scientifically as well, with trends that might not show that kind of trend. And this is the Italian Serie A, it's stayed relatively static over time, as you can see there. But the trends are crystal clear to me. In 5 of the 6 competitions there, we're seeing an upsurge in match intensity, which is of a kind of moderate to large magnitude increase. Okay? So it kind of indicates my point of the importance of the physical area in the modern game. And because it's so important, we need to try and maximize what we get from the physical tracking data in particular. And what I can see here, I've got real issues with. It's what I call blind distance covered. Distance with no context. We can, in some ways, see what's evolved, but not necessarily how and why it's evolved. And the reason why is it lacks inherent context. Okay? What would be more interesting to me would be, are these increases we're seeing on these screens here linked to, for example, an increase in intense pressing in the leagues? Are they linked to an increase in intense transitions from an offensive-defensive perspective? These are the kind of things that I think would add context to this data. So what I'm going to do for the rest of the presentation is talk a little bit about how we can, in some ways, move away from reductionism and that kind of blind distance covered model towards a kind of integrated, I would say, holistic and contextualized approach. And my stance on this changed in around about 2015. I was working as a consultant for an elite club, and this is what I was seeing after every game. A physical report, a technical report, and a tactical report. And after every game, we'd see the sports scientists all looking over the physical data in great detail, and how much distance did we cover, did we outsprint the opposition, etc. But they weren't bothered about the event data or the tactical dynamical data. It was the physical data they were really interested in. And the coaching staff at the club were the antithesis of that. They loved the event data, they particularly liked tactical video, but they weren't bothered about the physical data. They only really delved into it if the team was beaten heavily for certain reasons. But I know this is over 10 years ago now, and I'm probably speaking to the converted today. But football is not reductionist. It's one of the most integrated sports on the planet, where all of these three factors here you can see, plus many more, are all entwined and fused and amalgamated during every second of the game. And therefore, we can look at the individual areas, and some Premier League clubs are still doing this, believe it or not. But we don't get great data insights from isolation. We get great data insights when we dovetail and look at the interaction and fusion of these areas. And when we look at the interaction between the physical and tactical area, that's a really strong association between them two. What happens physically in the game of football is usually modulated and regulated by what happens tactically. And I'm going to go over this list in a bit more detail today, but if we just look at the first one, recovery running. Okay, that normally happens at intensity when a team loses the ball up relatively high up the field. The opposition break, and then that team has to turn around and produce these long, intense recovery runs to try and get goal side of the ball. So it's tactically modulated. It's all about the scenarios that modulate what happens physically. And so we just don't model the data in that way traditionally. So I'll go over that in great detail today. A little bit on the physical technical, like running at high speed with the ball. I don't really have much scope today in terms of time to cover the rest of it. But I wanted to start by a comparison between that traditional blind distance covered approach that's been used for decades in the game against a more holistic, integrated, contextualized approach. And I wanted to look at how sensitive both of these are at detecting positional and role-specific roles and responsibilities for players in terms of their demands. And this is what we've seen for many decades in the game now, this blind distance covered approach. And this is Premier League data, fairly recent data, where we've got 11 positions on the bottom. We've got intense running in meters along the side. And we see what we always see with this type of data here. You know, the wide players like wing backs and wide midfielders covering the most, and the centre backs the lowest intensity in match play. And the other positions are kind of somewhere between them two extremes. I think the only thing I probably find interesting about this is that we've got a box-to-box midfielder and a centre forward in a pair that they've got some kind of equal intensity in match play. But when we go from being blind to bang, being able to see the context for the very first time, we see that tactical context open up in front of us. Okay? We see not just what distance is being covered, but why it's being covered from a tactical perspective. So look at the box-to-box midfielder and the centre forward in a pair. Same absolute intensity, but the composition of that intensity from a tactical point of view is incredibly different. Okay, and I just want to start at the bottom to again illustrate the sensitivity of this approach. We can see the white intensity there, which is pressing intensity, and we can see as we move towards more offensive players, we're seeing more intense pressure as then players defend from the front. We can also see players with a real defensive duty in the team with a lot of blue and black intensity, which is covering space and other players while goal side, and recovery running. Okay. And then we can even see some brown intensity for two players in particular, the fullback and the wing back, which is overlap, underlap, to kind of cross in advanced areas. And then the purple intensity, which is running at high speed with the ball. And we can see that's really, really evident for the attacking midfielders and the two wide offensive players, the wide midfielder and wide forward. And then probably the most prominent colour you can see there, it's probably highlighted and it's probably drawing your eye a bit, is these orange intensities here, which is attacking the space in behind the defensive line, which are really prominent for the two centre-forward subsets there. So we clearly see that sensitivity there compared to that blind approach, but we can go a little bit deeper as well. So if we look at these two positions that are naturally collapsed together in data sets and we split them out, we can see that the absolute intensity is different, but just look at the composition between the fullback and wing-back in terms of what they actually do in a game. And we can see why the wing-back covers so much more intensity in match play, where they have that kind of dual role. In possession, you can see that yellow intensity as they support attacking play. You can see the purple there running down the channel with the ball. We can see them overlapping quite a lot, and even attacking the space in behind and breaking into the box at high intensity. And because wing-backs are more offensive, they're higher up the field. So when that turnover in possession occurs, we can clearly see all of that black intensity where they're producing them long recovery runs to get goal side of the ball. So we can see why that intensity is higher. The fullback has a much smaller repertoire in some ways in terms of their in-possession high intensity profile, with lots of covering there indicating a much deeper position as their goal side of the ball. And when we go from this big data set from the Premier League and we look at just two individual Premier League players in them two positions, we start to see what I'm talking about in a bit more detail. So we can see with the wing back, they're covering so many more intense efforts in the middle and particularly the final third. And you can see that yellow, brown, orange, which is support play, overlapping and even attacking the space in behind in wide areas. And then just look at that long recovery run. Okay, if we look at the context compass at the side and we go around the concentric circles, we can see it's a 50-meter recovery run, indicating just what I've been talking about, that they have to track back as well from a really offensive position. Well, when we look at fullbacks, again, we can see a high number of runs going back towards their own goal, covering space and other players. A little bit of excursion into the middle third there as well, but a much more defensive position. We can also see this sensitivity when we look at the extremes as well of that central midfield position. And we can see the box-to-box, the defensive and attacking midfielder. I'm just going to look at the extremes for this one. And we can see that comparison, there's a difference in the absolute distance covered at intensity, but just look at the composition. Okay, well, nearly 80% of that intensity from a defensive midfield is out of possession. Bit of pressing, good bit of covering, a bit of recovery running, not much in possession at the top here. Well, when we look at the attacking midfielder, they're the antithesis of that. We can see a lot of support running during offensive transitions in yellow. We can clearly see they're moving into pockets of space on the pitch. You can see a lot of intensity in green, running with the ball, attacking the space in behind, etc. So a very different profile. And you think they're attacking midfield, they do a lot of attacking, but just look at the pressing, the white intensity at the bottom as well. So we're seeing this incredible sensitivity with this approach by linking the event and tracking data together. Again, moving away from the big data sets to two case studies, just look at the context compasses either side. One's producing all their intensity towards their own goal, and the other one is the antithesis of that towards the opposition's goal. And then just look at the composition, the colours. Okay, we can see a lot of blue here, which is covering, and we can't see hardly any of that for the attacking midfielder. And then we can see green arrows for both of them, but in different tasks and responsibilities. You can see the defensive midfielder here producing intensity to receive the ball off the goalkeeper. and then the attacking midfielder moving into pockets of space out wide. In addition to that, you can see a lot of intensity in support play in yellow, particularly during an offensive transition, breaking into the box, driving inside, dribbling the ball. So you get all of this lovely narrative and story around the data when you start to contextualize it to a high degree. But so far I've been talking a lot about insights today. And in the data area we're working, it's all about insights, but it's also about taking them insights and putting them into something which is tangible, something that we can actually use. And one of my old PhD students, Jack Haid, who's at Liverpool Football Club now, has done a great job at taking some of these contextualized outputs and creating drills that are not just football specific, they're not just position specific, but they're very individualized as well for the uniqueness of each player. And what you can see on the left-hand side is a kind of top-up or return to play-based drill for a wide defensive play. And all of the things that I've just been talking about in relation to wide positions, you see this player doing. So you see him here when he retrieves the ball, dribbling at high intensity down the channel. You'll now see him overlapping. And then when he gets into a more advanced area, you can go outside and whip the ball in, or you can cut inside and play more centrally. And then because attacking wide defenders are so high up, when that turnover in possession occurs, big, long, linear recovery runs. Okay, they cover the most recovery running of all positions in the Premier League. All of that in a 30-second drill where we can manipulate the work-to-rest ratio depending on what we want to train. Okay, so it's great for a return to play-based drill. And then a more kind of central midfielder position, in the outputs we saw lots of short and sharp-based work in the central regions of the pitch, receiving and distributing the ball. And if you can remember from the output, box-to-box midfielders in particular do a huge amount of support play. So you can see him simulating that, driving through the middle at intensity. And then because a cross is coming, he's also breaking into the box to be an offensive threat. And then the position that produces the second highest amount of recovery running is a box-to-box midfielder, tracking back, simulating what we saw on the output. So we can get insights from it that are incredibly powerful, but we can also as well apply it into training drills. We have the physical data fused with context. It's easy to be able to prescribe these types of drills. In addition to looking at the data in its entirety over 90 minutes, we can also start to interrogate the data and look at worst case scenarios. And a lot of Premier League teams are doing this, where they look at peak demands to get insights, but also to be able to apply into training drills that mimic and replicate that. So the players get used to working really hard during training while maintaining their technical and tactical proficiency. Again, in terms of comparisons, this is what we see a lot of the time in clubs where they're looking at like peak 1-minute periods on a team level, peak 3-minute periods and peak 5-minute periods. But I can't derive any type of insight from that, and I certainly couldn't tell you what the players are doing during these worst case scenarios. I can't see any of that there. But again, if we go from being blind to really being able to see what the players and the team is doing during these peak periods, it opens up our eyes once again. When we look at each peak period, we can see the majority of that distance is out of possession, where we see a little bit of pressing, a bit of covering, and mainly recovery running. And these are kind of quintessential in some ways, offensive transition-based activities. And if we see this video here, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. That mimics that really well, where we can see the blue team here losing the ball relatively high up the field. You can see the blue player initially tries to win the ball back, and because he didn't, just look at the speed and intensity of multiple players tracking back to try and get goal side of the ball, or at least in a better tactical position for that phase of play. In addition to the out of possession responsibilities, which make up the most of that peak period, we can also see some in-possession activity there as well. And it's heavily loaded on the yellow here, which is support play, We see a bit of running in behind, a bit of dribbling with the ball. And again, we see these types of activities in offensive transition-based work as well. And this video will emphasize that again from the same game, where we see the blue team working relatively hard to turn the possession over. And when they finally do, just look at what the players do, exactly what we've just seen in that output there, where you'll see the highest player up, attacking the space in behind, dribbling the ball, and then multiple players supporting that attacking play, where we've seen quite a lot of intensity being accumulated overall. Okay? So they're the insights, but in terms of application, if we want to mimic, it's different for each club, but if we wanted to mimic generally in the Premier League at peak period, you wouldn't go far wrong with doing an offensive transition straight into a defensive transition. Okay, it's the most common scenario. It's very different for each club, but yeah, that's on the whole, if it was going to look at the most common scenario, that's the common scenario I'd pick. And when we look at the number of players that are involved in these periods, it's incredible in terms of how many players are involved. We're seeing around about 16 intense runs in a peak 1 minute period, and 9 individual players produce them intense runs. So pretty much all of the outfield players are involved in these peak periods. So they're really a lovely model in some ways to be able to produce team training. Rather than the individualised training I showed you earlier on from Liverpool Football Club, it's great to be able to see some team-based training. And again, Jack Aid has done a great job when he was at Newcastle United, being able to take them outputs for the team and be able to produce drills that simulate these types of transitions in a way. And what we've got here is 2 drills that combine. So we've got over here 2 central midfielders. We've got a centre forward and a centre back. We've got a full back here and a wide midfielder over here. And what you'll see as you're looking on the right-hand side, ball played into the central midfielder, ball over the top for the centre forward to attack the space in behind, and a 1v1 and a shot. We can see the full-back here playing the ball in and doing that long overlap. Wide midfielder driving inside and a lovely reverse pass around the outside there. And then you see the players attacking the box area, if they're an attacker, or defending it, if they're a defender. It doesn't really matter what happens. They then produce a recovery run into a set position, mimicking what we've just been talking about, that offensive transition straight into a defensive transition. And that's another 30-second drill where we can manipulate the work-to-rest ratio to develop different qualities. It's speed endurance production or speed endurance maintenance training, etc. And they do that 8 to 10 times. So effectively, in summary, what I've tried to get across in the relatively brief bit of time I've got today to do that is to indicate the evolution of the physical area of the game, just to highlight its importance to the modern game, and also how we can try and maximise what we get from tracking data by adding a narrative and a story around it, so we can really get some nice insights that are sensitive, but also trying to do something with the data. We can say, well, that's interesting and that's insightful, but it's great to be able to take something and use it, particularly in training-based drills. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of papers that have been published on this area that say in a very vague way this data can be used to develop training, but nobody ever does that. Okay, no one ever shows you how to do it. Okay, when we have context plus physical data, we're able to show you how we can prescribe them types of drills. Okay, thank you very much.